The disturbing footage you're seeing is not a scene from a horror film. It was a real-life nightmare, extracted directly from a graphic torture tape.
This is first kill, number one. First kill was 19 years old. Name, I don't know.
You want the master that pleases me to serve you. You are the master that pleases me to serve you.
Stop for it.
You are the master that pleases me to serve you.
Now you sit your ass down like I said.
A sadistic predator filmed his victim in a dark basement, forcing her to plead for her life before subjecting her to unimaginable brutality. He raped her, tortured her, and ultimately ended her life in cold blood. Tragically, she wasn't his only victim. Between 2000 and 2002, St. Louis, Missouri became the backdrop for a terrifying string of murders. Dozens of women, mostly sex workers, vanished, only to be found discarded in isolated areas far from anyone who could help. Authorities believe that as many as 20 women fell victim to this monster, Maury Travis. Today, we're diving into the disturbing case of the man dubbed the Streetwalker Strangler. His crimes were so horrific that veteran detectives who watched his videotapes of the assaults needed therapy afterward. Before we get into the case, don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll never miss an update on our most chilling true crime stories. Maury Travis was born on October 25, 1965, in St. Louis, Missouri, a city nestled along the Mississippi River. He grew up in what appeared to be a typical middle-class home in the suburb of Ferguson. By all accounts, his early years showed no clear signs of the darkness that would one day surface. At McClure High School, Travis was known to be smart but introverted, someone who kept to himself more than most. After graduation, he briefly enrolled at Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia, but financial struggles forced him to drop out before he could make anything of it. Then came his first descent into crime. In the late 1980s, Travis was arrested for a string of armed robberies. Police reports describe him storming into businesses and confronting people at gunpoint, demanding cash. While no one was physically harmed, the crimes were a clear signal that Travis had no issue using fear and intimidation to get what he wanted. In court, he chalked it all up to drug use, claiming he couldn't even remember committing the robberies. He insisted rehab had changed him while awaiting trial, but the judge wasn't convinced. Just before turning 24, Travis was handed a 15-year prison sentence. Barely 2 months in, he broke. Travis penned a letter to the judge, pleading for mercy. He said prison was unbearable, that he cried himself to sleep every night, and that his mental health was deteriorating fast. His plea went unanswered. Still, in 1994, after serving just 5 years, he was paroled. At 29, Maury Travis walked free. Back in St. Louis, he worked a series of low-wage jobs, including waiting tables. He had a few more minor brushes with the law, mostly involving theft and fraud, but nothing that raised any major red flags. To those around him, Travis seemed like a regular guy, quiet, polite, even friendly. But underneath that facade, a dangerous obsession was festering. He idolized infamous serial killers like Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy, studying their every move and keeping detailed, chilling notes about their crimes. His fixation with torture and murder was growing stronger and more dangerous. Travis also battled a crack cocaine addiction, which many believe fueled his increasingly erratic behavior. By the summer of 2000, subtle warning signs began to emerge. That's when Maury Travis began his reign of terror as the Streetwalker Strangler. There was a moment that still haunts one of Maury Travis's former co-workers. Someone at work casually brought up that a stolen car had been found torched in East St. Louis. Most people would have reacted with surprise, maybe even concern. But not Travis. Without missing a beat, he muttered something chilling. East St. Louis is a good place to dump things. Cops barely go there. At the time, the comment seemed off, too casual, too specific, but no one could quite put their finger on why it felt so unsettling. It wasn't until much later, when the truth about Travis came to light, that the co-worker realized just how disturbing those words really were. Around the same period, Travis was dating a woman named Julie, who was interning at KDL News. One day, completely out of the blue, Travis turned to her and asked, "Has your station ever done a story on the escorts being murdered lately?" It was a strange question, especially because, at that point, there hadn't been any media coverage about such murders. The public didn't even know they were happening. Between 2000 and 2001, several sex workers had indeed been found dead, dumped in East St. Louis and nearby areas, but the police were keeping that information tightly under wraps. Julie was puzzled. She had no idea these murders were occurring, and yet Travis seemed to know not only that they were happening, but that they were connected. He even referred to the killer as a serial killer. Julie brought the idea to her boss at the station, thinking it might be a story worth investigating. But her boss, like everyone else, hadn't heard a word about it. It didn't seem worth pursuing at the time. Then, less than 3 months later, the police finally made it official. There was a serial killer stalking the streets of East St. Louis, preying on vulnerable women, many of them African American, addicted to drugs and living without shelter. These women were being hunted in an area known as the Stroll, a stretch riddled with crack houses where women wandered the streets for days, desperate for the next high, the next meal, the next client. And it was in this forgotten pocket of the city that Maury Travis thrived. He knew the Stroll like the back of his hand. It gave him everything he wanted: drugs, control, and victims who wouldn't be missed. It was the perfect hunting ground for a monster hiding in plain sight. Maury Travis's reign of terror is believed to have started on March 19, 2000, and continued for 2 horrifying years until the day he was finally caught. While the full extent of his crimes may never be known, one thing became chillingly clear. He had a method, and it was calculated. Travis hunted in a place known as the Stroll, a stretch of St. Louis where vulnerable women, often battling addiction, walked the streets in search of their next fix or client. This was his hunting ground, and he knew it well. He'd cruise the area until he spotted someone who fit his type. Always calm, always polite, Travis approached like any other customer. There was nothing about him that screamed danger, and that's what made him so lethal. After some small talk, he'd offer them a ride back to his home in Ferguson. Most went willingly. What they didn't know was that their final moments were about to be recorded. Once inside, Travis would offer them drugs, and they'd usually agree to sleep with him. But what happened next took a dark, twisted turn. He began forcing his victims into bizarre rituals, making them change into a white dress and put on sunglasses. No one knows exactly why. Maybe it was part of a fantasy. Maybe it helped him dehumanize them. Whatever the reason, it became a disturbing part of his routine. And when they least expected it, he struck. He'd pull out a high-powered taser and shock them just below the collarbone, leaving them paralyzed and completely at his mercy.
The disturbing footage you're seeing is not a scene from a horror film. It was a real-life nightmare, extracted directly from a graphic torture tape.
When investigators watched the disturbing footage, they could hear the sickening thuds as Travis dragged lifeless bodies down the stairs. That's when his mask slipped. He turned cold, vicious. He bound his victims to a thick wooden post in the middle of the room, naked, handcuffed, and forced to kneel. Then came the interrogation. Travis fixated on their children, berating the women for choosing drugs and sex work over motherhood. He even filmed them, asking if they had any last words for their kids, knowing they wouldn't live to say them in person.
Some to your kids.
Mom, I'm sorry.
Who raising your kids?
Me and my mom and dad.
You ain't raising shit. You on here in your back smoking crack because you ain't going home tomorrow.
The women Travis targeted endured days of relentless torture and humiliation. He beat them savagely, using everyday kitchen utensils to slice through their skin. Blood painted the walls, but Travis never bothered to clean it up. He was too consumed by his sadistic pleasure. After each murder, he'd take a trophy, sometimes a piece of clothing, other times jewelry, and stash it away like a collector. He also carefully stored the disturbing footage he recorded, hiding the tapes within the very walls of his basement dungeon. When he was done, he dumped the bodies like garbage, often in remote stretches of East St. Louis or illegal dumping grounds, sometimes even burying them under piles of trash. Here are the victims police were able to identify. Alyssa Green, 34, found strangled in Washington Park on April 1, 2001. Teresa Wilson, 36, discovered in a ditch along Highway 67 on May 15th. Betty James, 46, was found just over a week later on May 23rd. She appeared in one of Travis's own tapes, and her body bore tire marks, indicating he had run her over. On June 29th, police found 36-year-old Verona Thompson's body just 16 feet from where Teresa's was dumped. Then, on August 25th, the decomposed body of Yvonne Cruz, 50, was discovered. She had been strangled and tortured. Months later, 33-year-old Brenda Beasley was found discarded in a trash heap. DNA confirmed both she and Yvonne had been sexually assaulted by Travis. The bodies kept piling up. Some victims were so badly decomposed they were nothing but skeletons, their stories lost to time. Travis didn't care. He had no empathy, no remorse. Take Teresa Wilson, for example. She had a young daughter named Chastity, and sometimes brought her along to the stroll, leaving the child on a bench while she worked. When Travis took her, he knew that little girl would be sitting there, waiting for a mother who would never come back. And that's the sickening irony. Travis often ranted about how these women were unfit mothers, claiming they put drugs and sex work ahead of their kids. But while preaching about responsibility, he lured them into his home, chained them up, tortured them, and murdered them. These weren't just crimes. They were calculated acts of domination and cruelty, all while knowing full well the children left behind would suffer the consequences. To him, these women weren't people. They were disposable, forgotten. Just another object to use, destroy, and dump in the dark corners of the city. The investigation dragged on for months, with little more than scattered leads and mounting bodies. Every 6 weeks, another victim turned up, strangled, tortured, discarded. Detectives quickly realized they were dealing with a serial killer, but without a suspect or clear evidence, the case stalled. In a desperate bid for progress, homicide investigators from Illinois and Missouri joined forces with the FBI, forming a multi-agency task force. But even with combined resources, the killer stayed one step ahead. Bodies kept appearing, brutalized in the same horrific fashion, and it was clear the murderer wanted to be found. In fact, he almost dared the police to catch him. At first, the task force thought they were hunting a white male trucker. Many of the bodies had been dumped along remote highways, far from urban areas. But as the discoveries continued, they began to suspect someone local, someone who knew the back roads and dumping spots intimately. The press dubbed him the streetwalker killer. Then came the break they'd been waiting for. On May 3, 2002, a letter landed at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch addressed directly to reporter Bill Smith. The envelope was chilling. Inside was a taunting message full of arrogance and bravado, claiming responsibility for the murders of 17 women. The killer enclosed a map with a red X, pinpointing the location of a body, Alyssa Greenwade. Smith had recently published a passionate front-page piece about the women who had been killed, many of whom were ignored or unidentified. He called out the lack of media attention and public empathy. His words clearly hit a nerve with the killer, who responded with eerie precision. The letter read, "Write a good story about Greenwade, and I'll tell you where the other bodies are to prove I'm real. Here's directions to victim number 17. Smith handed everything over to authorities. Investigators followed the map, and sure enough, they found Alyssa Greenwade's remains exactly where the X was marked. Now they had something to go on. The killer had used an online digital map to send the directions, specifically through Expedia.com, which at the time relied on Microsoft's mapping service. Detectives brought in digital forensic experts to trace the map's origin. Their goal, find out who accessed that specific section of the map between the time Smith's article ran and when he received the letter. At first, Microsoft refused to release user data, but under a subpoena, the company complied. They revealed that the map had only been downloaded once by an MSN account linked to a single IP address. The name tied to that account? Maury Travis. That IP address led investigators to his home, an unassuming house in Ferguson, Missouri. What they didn't know yet was that beneath it lay a secret chamber, the dungeon where he had tortured and killed his victims. With mounting evidence connecting Maury Travis to the murders, the police knew they couldn't waste any time. On June 7, 2002, a SWAT team descended on his home in Ferguson, Missouri. They had to move fast before Travis could flee or destroy any crucial evidence. The team surrounded the house and broke down the door. Inside, they found Travis calmly waiting, offering no resistance. The arrest was almost eerily peaceful. But the real horror emerged when investigators started to dig deeper into his home. Along with the computer they had been searching for, they found disturbing items: women's wigs, high heels, jewelry, and a stun gun locked away in a desk drawer. But the most chilling discovery came next: a book on how to conduct torture and disturbing articles detailing his victims. The basement revealed the full extent of his twisted mind. It was more than just a storage room. It was a dungeon. Investigators found a chilling collection of homemade videotapes where Travis could be seen torturing and abusing several women, leaving behind irrefutable evidence of his monstrous crimes.
In this footage, the victim is seen chained to a wooden pillar, her hands and legs restrained as she pleads for her life. Travis then picks up a belt and uses it to strangle her to death.
What investigators were forced to watch were among the most disturbing tapes ever made, each one more horrifying than the last. The content was so graphic and twisted that many of the officers who viewed it needed psychological treatment afterward. The tapes were not just violent, they were unspeakably dark, delving into the very depths of human depravity. The basement itself painted an even more chilling picture of the horrors Maury Travis had hidden. Blood stained nearly everything: walls, ceiling, doors, and carpet. Even the furniture was soaked with the aftermath of his monstrous acts. This was the setting for the nightmarish footage he had filmed. Among the disturbing items found in his home was a crude, hand-drawn diagram of plans to extend the basement into 2 prison cells. The drawings were chillingly detailed: air vents for ventilation, crawl spaces instead of doors to keep the cells hidden, and no bathroom facilities. He had even listed items like adult diapers, showing his grim plan to keep his victims captive for extended periods of time. Maury's girlfriend, who lived in the house with him, had no clue about the horrors taking place beneath her feet. She insisted she had never been to the basement, claiming it was a place reserved only for Maury. After his arrest, Maury was questioned for hours. He initially faced charges for the kidnappings of Betty James and Alyssa Greenwade, with tire tracks found on Betty's legs matching Maury's car. But soon, investigators turned their attention to the other victims from the tapes, whose DNA had been found all over the basement. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Maury remained cold and uncooperative. He showed no remorse, no emotion, nothing. Officers described him as a monster, completely detached from the gravity of his crimes. When asked how he thought he was caught, Maury arrogantly replied that he found the interview boring and that he wanted someone more challenging to speak with. Maury still couldn't seem to understand that his capture was inevitable, but when the police revealed that it was his letter to Bill Smith that led to his arrest, something changed in him. He began drumming his fingers on the table, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. But even then, he refused to cooperate. After his arrest, Maury Travis was locked away in a supermax cell at the St. Louis City Justice Center, a high-security facility built to house the most dangerous and high-risk criminals.
His cell was small, windowless, and equipped with a steel door and constant surveillance, with guards checking on him every 15 minutes.
Isolated in a high-security prison cell, Maury Travis was subjected to harsh conditions designed to break him before his eventual sentencing, death by lethal injection. This kind of isolation is common for those facing the death penalty, preventing escape and self-harm. Without any personal belongings, Travis lived under strict psychological control, every movement watched by surveillance cameras. But despite the intense surveillance, Travis found the conditions unbearable. He repeatedly complained, claiming they were pushing him toward mental collapse. Then, on June 10, 2002, just before his trial, Travis devised an unimaginable plan to escape his fate. But the way he chose to do it was beyond anyone's expectations. Locked in his 8th-floor cell at the Clayton jail, Maury Travis decided to take matters into his own hands and end his life on his terms. Despite the constant surveillance, Travis found a way to hang himself using a piece of clothing. He was alone in his cell, with no direct supervision. Although guards were required to check on him every 15 minutes, the officer assigned to monitor him failed to do so. This lapse in duty gave Travis the time he needed to carry out his plan, unnoticed. When authorities discovered his body, they found a note that Travis had written in his final moments. It read, "You guys didn't kill me," making it clear that his death was his choice, not the state's. Along with the suicide note, police found another letter in his cell, this one addressed to his mother. It said, "Dear Mom, I'm sorry for the pain I have caused you and the family. My death seems to be the only way out and a fast end to all of this publicity. You were the best mother a man could have, but I've been sick in the head for a long time, since I was around 14. I don't know why, I was just sick. I have never felt normal or happy at any time in my life. This seems to be the best solution for all involved, especially me, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life locked up, or worse, let them kill me with a needle. Tell Grandma, Marina, James, and everybody that I love them dearly. But I love you the most. Forever. Your son, Maury Travis." The contents of these letters baffled investigators. The lack of remorse for his horrific crimes left many puzzled about what turned Travis into a cold-blooded killer. Interviews with those who knew him revealed no significant childhood trauma or clear explanation for his descent into violence. Some theorized that Travis's violent tendencies came from a deep-seated hatred for women involved in sex work, while others believed his addiction to crack cocaine distorted his judgment and amplified his aggression. There were also those who thought he might have had psychological issues, particularly a need for attention and recognition, which was evident in the taunting letter he had previously sent to the media. Regardless of the reason, Travis's suicide ensured that he would never stand trial or face the consequences for his actions. His death denied the families of his victims the closure they deserved, and it raised serious questions about the effectiveness of the constant surveillance he was under, especially given that authorities knew about his risk of suicide. Needless to say, the public was outraged.
To say that I was angry and to say that people in the newsroom were angry about it and that the community was angry about it is really an understatement. I think people were furious.
By the time Maury Travis took his own life, investigators had linked him to at least 12 victims, though he claimed the true number was closer to 17. Detectives in neighboring counties suspected he was behind several other unsolved murders, which could mean the real total was over 20. His reign of terror shed light on the vulnerability of marginalized groups, especially sex workers, and exposed the systemic failures that allowed such brutal crimes to go unchecked. Travis's death meant that he never had to face the consequences of his actions. Some believe it served as a symbol of evil prevailing over justice. Despite his capture and the exposure of his horrific crimes, true justice was never served. What do you think about the way Maury Travis's story ended? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.